Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Roll 2 DMs. I am here, joined by Solomon,
The one and
the
only.
usual
The
suspects.
usual.
And
Once
yeah,
again, the aspect ratio is two Josue to one slave, one
yes,
sadly.
precisely. No more, no less.
Yes.
Thank you all for joining us. Episode 10, finally,
Yes.
officially in the double digits here.
Double digits. Yeah.
So
Crazy.
that's hype. 10th
Yeah.
episode. And today we're actually a little slow on the questions and topic requests, but after a little bit of chatting, we decided that maybe revisiting and adding a little bit more to
Yeah.
world building was a good idea, because I think this is probably world building is probably something we talk about the most.
Yes, because it is a big thing. We're both really big fans of world building, honestly.
Yeah.
And also, it might serve us good. Also for for our listeners, if you want us to revisit or re-explore and expand on previous topics, let us know. You know, we really have no real issue of going back to old topics and covering them more. If there's something we missed or there's a question, really, because it's no.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a fair warning, or I guess not necessarily a warning, but just
No.
a note of change is that because there's only so many like strict topics that we can really cover.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm trying to get the Twitch pulled up so I can look at the chat. Yeah, but that's not here. I need to give the additional viewer.
For reference, we have both the Twitch stream on the big screen and as well as on Josue's phone,
Yes,
so we can reach y'all the best.
I need to spoof as an extra viewer.
Yeah,
We
have two extra viewers now. Nice. Wait, actually, that's crazy.
Big brain.
3. Oh, nice.
Yeah, just as a side note.
Shout out to Ibrahim. Yes.
Cool.
All right. Yes. No.
Yeah, just as a small side note, because there's only like a certain amount of strict topics we can really cover. We are going to start probably transitioning future episodes into more freeform.
Yes.
Which is kind of how like the idea for the podcast I think kind of started, was just like sitting down and talking about D&D and DMing in general.
Sure, and it did benefit us to have that structure and that general format initially to help us out, especially for me personally, since I've never done this before. Obviously we have Josue very skilled in such things.
So
the master,
actual expert.
podding all the casts.
Actually podded like 3 casts at least. So we'll maybe be switching to freeform, but in any case, that is the reason why we are hitting world building part 2, and we can roll into the next topic, which is actually recycled from the previous session. But
yes, I don't feel we gave it that question that much justice.
Yeah.
We kind of ended up running a bit too long, and had to truncate to an amount, because it is a very big and huge topic. Because how do you make your world you lived in? We've provided some tools and such, but there is a lot more we can do, really.
Yeah, and we kind of cut it short last time, but we do want to revisit it today because in reality, this is probably one of the, I would consider it one of the most important things when putting together stories that are very plot driven.
Yes.
And that's really just because if your world doesn't feel like you have to give your players that illusion that they're in like a very real scenario that has substance to it.
Yes.
And they should feel like they're impacting that. They should feel a lot of what's in the world is actually like it actually matters to them. So I think
make the world feel like a world.
Yeah, exactly. One thing we didn't necessarily cover super closely, but something I maybe wanted to get more into the specifics of, are in world building. How do you deal with political dynamic?
Oh yeah.
And this is
a
again
episode?
Something.
Oh no.
This is something that doesn't come up for every single campaign by any means.
It is covered. No, it is a like D&D. Lots of times it's a reflection of real life elements and real life components of society in general. We live in a society,
Yeah.
And it's
No doubt.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, it's a very key thing to just keep that in mind, that we all are despite us maybe subconsciously interesting such elements, it is a thing that our players experience, both in real life and in game, is politics and all that messy stuff that comes with it, really.
Yeah. And so the reason why I bring this up, and I think we've talked about it a couple of times, but I know, for example, in my world, I like to have like different nations that are either not necessarily like magic. Yeah, I guess magic averse is like
Yeah.
the thing that I would describe it best. But a lot of times when you're building out a world, it's pretty natural, especially in high fantasy settings,
Yeah.
to have some sort of political turmoil, and it
Tension
doesn't.
is excellent.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a driving point of your plot. Like you can have a political situation that sort of acts in tangent with or in conjunction with what's going on in your world, but it need not necessarily affect it. So the thing that I like to compare it to is what we talked about last week about like that sort of enigmatic figure that appears to the
Yes.
players.
The mysterious stranger.
Sometimes if that person is like a big shot politician,
Yeah.
the politics and the way that the world works, I think, at least for me, is a very integral part of
Yeah.
world building.
No, for sure.
Because having like it's weird, but like national identity in D&D can be such a powerful driving force for not necessarily your player characters, but like everything around them.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah,
Because
for sure.
the way that you make a world feel lived in is to have like that sort of variety in thought in the actual like characters that inhabit your world. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be black and white. So
Yeah,
if
true.
you meet someone from like, for example, a nation that is very magic averse, you might ask them about magic and they'd be like, "Oh, magic's stinky."
Exactly.
And then you go to like whatever other nation, you're exploring your campaign, and they're like, "Hell yeah, magic!" Like, but we regulate it. And then you have another one that's like, whatever, people can cast whatever spells. And the people within those different settings are all gonna have like different reactions to your character, like to your player characters.
That is true.
So I don't know if you use it in your games at all, but I like using it that way, just because sometimes I feel like it helps me give the players that sense of like fantasy. It's like sometimes I feel like campaigns get very caught up in the mechanics and they don't realize how
The scope of it.
the scope of it, because I feel like magic shouldn't be this mundane thing that tons of people can
That is the
carry.
thing I very much agree with, especially in terms of world building and how you deal with magic. It's a thing that I feel is a very good tool for every DM to have. Is controlling how magic is perceived and building the whole like I guess mythos and general perception and such. And I did want to bring up just a previous point that you talked about in regards of politics and conflict and such. In my opinion, how I kind of see using such elements in my games is very much it's always useful to have conflicts and have problems that players can easily and logically identify with.
Right.
There's a case where lots of times like sure you have all these demigods and these magic and these god kings and all these whack ass like magic infused and fantastical enemies and conflicts. The dragon is someone has fallen in Lego City. Like it's one of those things where like
Yeah.
you have those issues. Right?
Yeah. It
And
comes
you
up.
have sometimes players, and I feel like also DMs sometimes you fail to recognize sometimes the conflict or the severity of such issues when you're just in the game, but adding some stuff and some elements of conflict that are more identifiable with real life and more like I guess like perceivable in
Yeah.
a way that damn, this thing does really feel like this is a big issue. Like
Right.
making the players feel and kind of identify with these issues is a tool that using real life elements of conflict, not is a very nice tool.
Yeah.
Personally.
And yeah, I like the way that you're putting it, because the way I would almost describe it, and this again works to add life to your
Yes.
world building, is that a lot of especially for me, a lot of the like powerful political characters, like characters that have very serious sway in the world, are like stereotypical like zero CR humans. Like
Yes.
they're
That's the scariest thing about them.
right, because they're I love the idea of, and I do this sometimes with mob bosses too, like you could
A
drive
mundane civilian,
you could literally drive a longsword through this guy and he'd be like useless, he'd be dead.
But you'd be dead also.
Yeah, exactly, because like
your
the
family
power
would be
of like
dead. Yeah,
information,
yeah.
the power of political influence.
Exactly.
Like I feel like like including politics is cool because it adds an entirely different like power scale that
Yeah.
goes beyond like how sharp your sword is, how well you wield it, or how powerful your magic is. like it for me it adds that extra layer of like, okay, but do you know the right people to not literally get murked by whatever assassins exist in the capital?
Exactly.
Or like, are they just gonna send the royal guard that are all, CR 20 fucking super soldiers to kill you? What are you gonna do then?
Yeah,
um
and all cloned from the level 20 paladin that served is immortal and is now like
right.
yeah.
Because like I guess it doesn't come up that often because like most of the campaigns I've had don't have like murder hobo like
Yes.
level of like rampage.
Which is a blessing,
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I feel
Shout
like
out to our players.
yeah. Shout out for being considerate of our world building.
Yeah.
But I think it's like it's cool when I can get away with making a character feel very powerful and not and like get asked the stats and I'm like, don't worry about it. And I say that like he's really powerful, but in reality he's like he has like one interesting charisma ability and like negative con and like 2 HP. Because yeah,
It's always
exactly
fun,
that.
yeah.
Like
He's just proficient in charisma and deception. Like
yeah,
he's just
exactly.
proficient in deception, or like I guess all the charisma skills. Because
Yeah.
that's the thing, and yeah, no, I fully agree.
Yeah, and so that's why I like adding politics. It's something that you like your players just can't inherently brute force.
Yeah.
Like if there's a big monster in front of them, they can just like attack it and get rid of it with magic, whatever. But when it gets to like bigger points, like oh your party wants to accomplish something, but the local government doesn't want it to happen. Like
Yeah,
oh
no.
shit, like you can't just throw magic at it. You can't just like attack
You can't just
it.
fireball this.
Yeah, you have to like
Maybe like 5 fireballs.
be a
but, like,
little
yeah.
bit creative.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, if you're trying to like skirt around it, like how much life does that add? Because now they're not just watching the world for like all of the nice things, all the cool NPCs you put in it.
The
They're
difficulty.
also
and
watching like
ugliness.
for all of the guards and like
Yeah.
the potential spies. They're looking over their shoulder.
Yes.
That is also
It's a
one
very
way
nice
to
element.
make your world feel lived in. Is
Yeah.
if you inflict that like natural fear into the
And
PCs.
tension, just adding it. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, you don't need that for every campaign. The
True.
campaigns can be as lighthearted as you want. I did
Or
just
as
want to
gritty
cover
and
this topic.
Horrifying as it can be.
I wanted to cover the topic because I realized that's like probably one of my most used like tropes is like powerful
Yeah.
politicians who or powerful even just like mob bosses who aren't actually like ability or stat strong. They just their currency and their power level is in information
Yeah.
and influence.
True, and honestly, like you talk about politicians and non-magical enemies and such, and it just reminds me of how I personally am a big fan of using the whole, I guess, kind of Bane enemy archetype, where this person is an average person who has excelled and who's completely like no superpowers whatsoever, or even you can call it like the Batman approach,
Right.
or the Tony Stark approach, where this guy is and this can work both for NPCs, villains, and perhaps even like a PC if you're like fairly into that whole theme.
Right.
Is very much the whole concept of in a world where everything is magical and someone can just snap their fingers and you just turn to ashes with no chance of getting
Right.
back alive. How does the average person who's not skilled in the arcana survive in this world?
Right.
How does a person who can face who's a mundane CR0 civilian survive in a world where you can literally walk outside and there may be just some guy who like wild magic surge and cast fireball on you? You're like
Whole
oh,
village is
you're a
dead.
fatality. Your family can afford the diamonds.
Yeah.
You're dead. And like I guess that approach and that kind of concept is, in my opinion, like a fairly interesting element of world building that you can add. Is how does the world react? How do the average people react to a world where there's so much dangerous magic?
Right. All right, another layer on top of that then, because this is also something that
Yeah.
I've used a lot. Moving
It's like a
beyond
nesting doll
politics,
thing, yeah.
moving beyond politics, war.
Yes.
How do
Oh
you
my God,
use
yeah,
how do you use national and I guess like I
World
keep
War,
saying
Civil Wars,
national,
yeah.
but like actual territorial boundary disputes, because
Yes.
I feel like that creates a strife that is so easy to implement in campaigns, and it's
Yeah.
also like I think Matthew Colville
Yeah.
covers the fact that like in all of these settings and in truth like not to get too meta but like in life like the natural state of things tends to be conflict, right?
Yeah.
Like
struggle of man,
the
yes,
old
yes.
all of the all of these like high fantasy campaign settings they should feel irregular if everything's at peace. That
Yeah.
he does a much better job of describing it, but I that's something that I find interesting because yeah, like in my world building, I almost immediately jump in my head to like, okay, who's fighting who, because it just is so like it feels so inherent for
Yeah.
these things to have something like that. And again, it doesn't have to be directly involved in your campaign, but I know, for example, when we did the first like Valscore,
Yeah.
that season with Valscore, there was wars literally ravaging the entire
Yeah.
continent. And so my campaign was very very war and politically driven. So I was able to, I felt, create that that ambiance that I was aiming for very easily by showing how the
Yeah.
commoners
The
and
average
how just
person.
like other people that
Yeah.
aren't the PCs are actively struggling with the
Yeah.
war, because the war is inherently that thing that affects all in some way or another, right? Like
Exactly.
the people who are like running the wars are probably sitting atop a throne full of riches, whatever.
Or
Or
dying in
if
a
you're on the
ditch
losing
sometimes.
side, yeah, then
Yeah.
you're getting destroyed.
Yeah, like The Witcher
Um,
covered that like Wild Hunt. You remember like with the first area we were going through that war torn and kind of no man's land,
right.
and like seeing like how messed up the land is
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah,
And it can be bleed over a lot of ways, and it can also
yeah,
be an interesting way to change how your world feels, because
true.
it's really easy to like have a little town that you build for your for your PCs to kind of explore, and then maybe they come back later when you've implemented this like wartime,
Yeah,
and all the
it's-
shops are closed, and you're like,
sort of
what's
like,
going
yeah.
on? And they're like, all the blacksmiths are on the front creating weapons for
yeah.
the war, like
There's a metal shortage. You know?
right, like or a
Yeah.
food shortage, right? So like you
Yeah.
get to the town and people are literally like lining up for rations, and you're like, what the hell? But that like immediately puts in the perspective, and I think it's unfortunate, but like I feel like it's way easier to create um
It's a sad
dark
fact
motifs
that,
to
human
world building.
conflict is very easy to like.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing is like once again with politics and war and stuff like that, these are human conflicts that do affect real life people.
Right.
And having that amount of it may feel cheap at times to use it and such, and I do personally feel there's an amount of respect to deal with such topics.
Right.
But also it is an excellent element to enrich your world and make it feel that especially if you're going for that kind of vibe and angle, is it is a very like human form of conflict that almost everyone can identify with how bad war is, right?
Right.
And that's the thing is like using that stuff is a very good tool.
Yeah. And just conflict, war in
Yes.
general. I think you said it best. Like it's just the fact that it's something very real and relatable.
War never changes,
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
And
It's
I guess
that-
just
yeah.
in general, like with what we've talked about, world building, making a world feel lived in. The easiest way to do that is to mimic life, right?
Yes.
Like because
we live in this
able-
world,
Yeah, literally. It's the easiest way to do it is to implement something that people can relate to in real life. And
Yes.
I will like mention a caveat, because again, you also mentioned this, but it's important to approach some of these things with a certain degree of like
Respect,
caution and
yeah.
respect.
And
But
make
at
sure
the same
everyone's cool
time,
with it also. 'Cause
yeah.
some people just really like in my case to the large amount like I'm not that big of a fan of having active conflicts and having that certain vibes in terms of conflict and such in my world, because you see this like personally I get sick of it seeing it in real life, and
Right.
it's one of those things where like I'm like, damn, this is sad.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have that in your game, but at some point it is also kind of I guess cathartic to portray it in game and kind of explore that stuff in game than in real life.
Right.
And there's an element that I feel like once again talk to your players about it. Are they cool with this stuff? Are they familiar, or are they do they have any apprehension towards certain elements in regards of war?
Right.
Because there's some people who might be cool with the whole concept. Once you get into prisoners of war, they get weird and they they feel uncomfortable, and that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
Whatever
'Cause
makes you feel comfortable.
I definitely have like my opening skit whenever I play with a new group.
Yeah.
That is like,
Make sure who's
please,
okay with
please
what,
let me
yeah.
know if you guys are. I think that big three, the big things that I mentioned are like sexual content, drug
Yes.
use, or substance abuse.
Yes,
And,
that is a big one.
And
also,
like
true.
actual like graphic like
Violence.
violence being described.
Yeah.
Because I agree. It's not like that I love just like putting in war and being like, yeah, all my NPCs are
People are
suffering
dying.
so hard.
This place sucks so bad, and I'm having so much fun doing this.
Yeah,
Like
literally,
there's an
it's
amount of
yeah,
I guess sadism in that
yeah,
regard, but
yeah.
also there's
It's
an amount of
that's
like
like
respect. You know,
yeah,
where, yeah.
yeah. Because that's never like my aim when I'm world building. I'm like, I can't wait to write all about how these
I can't
random
wait to
little
write up war
shack is on
crimes. Yeah.
fire. Yeah, I can't wait to write war crimes. No, it really should be, and I don't just like sit there every session and describe in explicit detail every injury that I describe.
Yeah.
It's more just
Bones
like
jutting out of your shins. The child is crying. What's
yeah,
happening?
It's
Like,
more
you know,
so
it's too
like
dramatic.
being
Yeah.
clear with my players that I'm like sometimes for me it's very appropriate to embellish it in that way. Like there is sometimes moments where I'm like, this is where I might have a very strong impact by going a little
Emotional
bit deeper
impact
in this
also, yeah.
description. And I'm not there to just like make the players bawl or feel terrible about what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's more so just like, again, going back to making my world feel lived in. All of these aspects help me tell
The
the
highs
story.
and the lows, you know.
Yeah, exactly. They help me tell the story at its best and at its worst because, like, inherently, and again, this always I'm gonna keep saying this over and over, but I like my campaigns a little grimdark.
Yeah.
I like the balance of like because
All
I feel
those
like the
D12s make it
brightness.
very dark.
The you don't even understand, but like all those bright moments. The reason why I do that is because
Two
that's how
D12
I
for
like
war crimes. Damn.
to 2d12. Shit, how many war crimes do you commit in
Up
an
to
hour?
you,
Roll a
not- yeah.
d12. But yeah, it's more so for me just because like the type of stories that I like to tell really kind of fit in that scope. It's easier for me to tell those stories in that scope than if just like you're in the peaceful progressive land of magic where everything is perfect and everything is just in a
Utopia.
bubble. Because like I can tell those stories, but for me it's like not only is it less rewarding, but also I feel like the highs are more exalted when you have like enough
Yes.
lows.
I
It's
do
just like
agree
a
with that, yeah.
balancing. It's and again, it might also go to like the media I consume, the books I read. Right, everyone has a very different approach to storytelling, so that's
Yes.
what helps me.
That is
Um,
true. Yeah.
But
I fully
but
agree. Yeah.
that balance is important, and I encourage people when they're world building to find that because if you don't want, like, you don't need any of this explicit conflict in your world. You can have like lowly political slander be like the worst, where it's basically like one group
Politician
talking
A
to
says
another.
politician B sucks ass.
Yeah, literally.
know?
Like it can literally be that. It could even just be the threat of war.
Yeah.
Just like
Yeah,
the
no, for
threat
sure.
of conflict is enough for like
The looming threat of
yeah,
like,
exactly.
No,
Like
for
you
sure.
can make towns so antsy with that, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know, I didn't get this shipment. I wonder if it's because so and so is starting to like line up troops." Like,
Yeah, even having those scares and those Cold War events
right,
are very useful also. And I did want to mention just just hopping off like before we transition to like the next topic, but like there's the whole concept, you know, you have to go through the dark tunnel to get to the light, you know. You have to go through, you know, like there has to be contrast when you're, especially when you're making a world that wants to feel realistic. We're not having a fun time every day,
Yeah.
you know. Some days you have like five homeworks and a quiz tomorrow, and you're like, you know, just
True.
crunched to the you know,
yeah,
day's end, you know.
Yeah.
And other days you're having a blast, and you know, like you're on a podcast, you know. So like it's one of those things where like, you know, yeah, like you have to have the dark to, you know, you have to it's black and white, you know.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree.
And shades
So
of gray, yeah.
in terms of adding like lived-inness to a campaign, it really is about that. Is about layering how you're telling your story. Because if your story is very straightforward and very simple, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. All we really recommend is that like you take a look at your story and you see what in the world could be happening to help me tell my story
Yes.
better. Because that will just automatically lead to your world feeling a little bit more lived in, feeling like there's actually like stakes beyond
Yeah.
just like what your PC, like what you've written your timeline for PCs. But again, it's not the most like important thing in the world. It really does come down to
It's a thing to think about and
Yeah.
keep in mind in case.
it depends on the style of your campaign, but for anything that's like super lore heavy, something where you really want the players to feel like the
deep
world
lore.
is there.
You know, you got the
Yeah.
lore on lore on lore.
Yeah, exactly. The layers, like an onion.
This lore entry is a reference to this previous lore entry that you have to access through this DLC.
Dude, I've already mentioned how I actually like to hide
I
lore and
know,
item
yeah,
descriptions.
Yeah.
Oh my god, or just like the titles of swords and shit.
Yeah.
But anyway,
We can
yeah,
probably transition to
Yeah.
the next topic,
we
right?
can probably shift over to the next topic. And no, I'm not pulling it up on my phone because I forgot what it was. But we were talking a
Characters
little
and
bit about
making your
building.
story, yeah.
Yeah, I remembered as I was pulling it up.
We're professional
backstage.
podcasters.
But yeah, we wanted to talk about we covered it a little bit, but we
Writing and
wanted to
world
kind
building
of
around characters.
revisit,
Yes.
yeah, writing and world building around characters.
I'm telling
And
you, the big screen is useful.
huge,
Yeah.
enormous, honestly, literally enormous. But we wanted to revisit that because we also kind of want to expand on it just in general
Yeah.
to include PCs as well as NPCs.
True.
So I guess when it comes to world building, this has to come at a certain point where you're comfortable with some of the rest of your world building, and it depends on what order you do it in. But when you're writing around, I want to ask about PCs first. So when you're developing your player characters with your players, how often and how much does the development of your character affect your world building? And do you go out of your way to make adjustments to previous things you've put into the world to make things
Yeah.
fit?
I feel like we slightly touched on this on last episode, but yes, I do personally. I'm a fan and I'm a heavy user of set the PCs and then mold the world to the PCs.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially when you're at the point of very early on when you're just making the original world, because there's really just kind of two stages of world building where you're setting it up and setting out the playing field and then expanding on it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for me, like having during that initial first phase, I do have a habit of very much molding and shifting and accommodating like the world and making changes to it that would benefit the PCs as well as benefit NPCs, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like adding locales, like a thing I usually ask my players during like our session. I try to have like a session 0 between like one-on-one between me and the player, and I usually ask them a very big question, if they have any preference for any cultural bases or accents that they want to use.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any accents in mind and such? And from those questions is where I usually form the accents that my certain areas of the world may have. Like I remember one player wanted to have a more Norse / kind of Viking inspired like kind of accent and like cultural base. And I was like, damn, I don't really have anything like that. Let me like look at my map, and oh yeah, there's a section that's kind of Germanic inspired.
Yeah.
I'll cut out a chunk of it and make it this kind of Norse mountain land.
Mm-hmm.
And building that stuff, and like it does, because once again you are kind of making the story lots of times with your players.
Yeah.
Right. And I very much am a proponent of having that kind of cooperative kind of story building stuff where yes, I will have this character does want to have kind of this like kind of southern accent and such. I want to have a like a bayou like kind of like locale also.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't initially think of that, but now that whole section is a swampland.
Yeah.
Or or a marshlands, or I keep forgetting which one's which.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like I very much am. I feel like it's very important, fairly useful for ideas and stuff you might have missed. Really.
Yeah. So I'm glad we revisited this because I had a feeling we might have it slightly different. And again, I've covered how like a lot of times I'll write my stories and
Yes.
and I'll find a way to like put PCs in situations where they can get involved if they want to, or
Yeah.
they can just like vibe with the world. But I have noticed, and this is just going back to like the last couple of like actual writing sessions I have. It's been a while since I've like sat down to like really world
Imagine
build.
writing.
Imagine. Well, we'll get into that. But
Yeah, that's gonna be a full different episode of just burnout.
yeah. But yeah, what I've noticed is I when I'm building worlds and building characters and building plot lines, I actually usually do that with the fact that I'm going to put PCs in mind. So as opposed to talking to my PCs after I've sort of world built, talking to them and then retroactively sort of making adjustments around my characters, what I usually do while I'm world building is I'll put pockets in my world where I think I might be able to fit characters.
Okay.
So as I'm like building a plot line, for example, if I've mentioned this before, but if I'm doing like the whole like arcane school thing where like the characters are grad students.
Yes.
I've used that as an example a couple of times.
Yeah.
I have like their A to B roughly and like
Yeah.
the areas in between. So when I'm building that, I'm like I'm sort of opening little slots where I think player characters might be interested in fitting into. So this can be things like either direct relationships to people involved in the campaign, people directly involved to locations in the campaign, And so I'll sort of start like opening little pockets, and then when I talk to my players, I ask them pretty similar questions like, "Hey, like I think I mentioned my like the way that I ask usually
Yeah.
is, do you want to be local? Do you want to be from like
Foreign.
around
Yeah.
but like foreign, or do you want to be like you're literally on another continent sort of shit?"
Yeah.
Um,
Fish out of water
and
kind of
with
experience.
the yeah, with the third option, that's more where I get into adaptive world building,
Yes.
where like if they tell me something, I'll like go in my notes and be
From a
like,
distant
I'll
land
keep it
named X. Now it's named Exandria.
Alexandria. Oh, spicy. Yeah, that's not actually bad. Just name it a letter and then figure it out later. But but yeah, that's when I'll like really retroactive, right? And it's more just like I'll take notes and be like, okay, he's from this continent. I'll remember that there's a country there where they talk like this and they do
Yeah.
this. But otherwise, I'll ask him questions, and if they say like from around here, I'll give kind of targeted questions. Again, I feel bad because it's like it's almost like I'm manipulating them into going
You're
into
pushing.
the pockets
You're,
that I want.
you're doing
Um,
guided questions.
yeah, the illusion again, the illusion of choice. But I'll ask like, and it's usually because I think it's things that people will find interesting. And again, no one ever has to take my bait.
Yes.
So I'll like
Sometimes they don't
I'll
bite
ask,
and it's fine.
yeah, exactly. So like usually I'll like if they're gonna be like I'm local, I might ask them a question like, do you want to be involved with the person giving you this mission, or do you want to be involved with someone who might be peripherally like related to this to what you're about
Yeah.
to embark on, or do you want to be just like a nobody? Do you? And this also depends on their class selection.
Yeah.
Like if I'm doing this whole grad school thing, right, where they're in a magic school and someone wants to play like a barbarian fighter, I'm not gonna say no. That doesn't fit with the campaign. On the contrary,
Yeah.
in my head, I'm three light years,
Yeah.
parallel universes
Full
ahead of
throttle.
them.
Yeah.
Where I like already thought about like people are gonna pick different classes. Okay, you want to be this? Do you want to be a free hire mercenary that got hired by the person who's
Security,
running this
yeah.
expedition?
Because you'd imagine in
Yeah.
an adventuring school, you'd have people trained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or are you like a
Yeah.
school guard? Like, are you like the school cop? You're just like hired by a firm to like protect the grounds of the school, and you just somehow got involved in. And like
Yeah.
that's where I have to adapt, right? Like if they're just like, yeah, I just want to be like, what? Like if
Or
they're
you're an
not super
exchange student.
invested, yeah. If they're not super invested in like the whole magic thing, I'll find a way to like fit them. But those are things that I'm like considering during my world building, because it would be pretty ignorant of me to like sit there and develop this whole like grad school magician idea and then not know what to do when someone gives me a fighter barbarian. Like
Yeah.
it's going to it should come up. And my again, even though the plot seems sort of restrictive, I don't want people to be restrictive to their class
I fully agree.
and
I'm
race selection.
Very much a proponent of
Yeah,
that. Yes.
exactly. So I've already kind of thought about places where I might put them. So I'll ask very targeted questions, and if people aren't interested in those lines, I'll kind of open up with kind of my bigger questions, which are like, okay, what is your character motivated by?
Yeah.
And that can be
What do they want,
Yeah,
you know?
that's a very pointed question, but usually if people don't bite with the things I ask, it's because they already have something more specific in mind.
Yeah. Not true. Yeah.
And that's probably where adaptive writing comes up the most for me.
Yes.
Because then I either have to like
Shift
tie the right
goal, yeah.
strings or like reorder
Yeah,
things
yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit.
I feel it. Yeah.
Because again, I'm doing my best to, like as I'm writing, to create those like little areas where I think PCs will fit. And
Yeah.
if they don't fit exactly, I'll be like, oh, maybe I'll just like change this a little bit. Now it fits great. Like
Yeah. The biggest example I use personally for that kind of adapted kind of writing stuff is, when I have a player that's going into a warlock and such, I usually, especially if that's their first character that they're doing in my game and such, I usually, like initially ask them, what would your character's motivations be? What would they be interested in doing? And, like what type of, I never really asked them what type of patron they would want,
Sure.
really, as much as I usually ask them what they would want in life, or
Right.
what their characters would desire. And usually it depends on the exact patron like dynamic and such. I am also a big fan of sometimes when the players are like go crazy, or like stuff like that. It's very much kind of a theme of the kind of patron coming in a moment of need or desperation, really.
Right.
And having the element of adaptive, where if a player wants to create a character, this whole thing is like changing their identity, and kind of like they were previously like an assassin, but they want to become a surfer.
Right.
Shout out to my
Dramatic change.
Yeah, shout out to my players. Shout out to Jacob. Like that was like a really cool concept.
Just a career.
Where like you shift from being like a hired assassin who was trained by their family to be like edgy assassin stuff, but you know you don't want to be you don't want to be
That's
that.
not, that's not what you're looking for.
Yeah, and like then I would have like the patient, like initially I wouldn't really have any idea what the patient would be. Well, once I know that, I can write out that, oh yeah, this patient is more of the type of that give you like take destiny into your own hands type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like be like, the deal I'm giving you is your own freedom of choice.
Right.
And which is inverse of usually what patients do.
Oh yeah.
And so sometimes having those adaptive kind of like tools are fairly useful for as a DM, especially in the world. Having I feel like I have no idea why I've really like patients are really easy to do that stuff with, really,
Right.
because essentially it's a person in world who most times knows what the other person desires,
Right.
and is purely like with almost like with an ice pick kind of drilling into that kind of like desire and
Right.
tapping into it,
Yeah.
and having that type of person, it's a really good way of like showing the players that this world is sometimes more aware of what they want than themselves.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. And I think you bring up something interesting because I think some players are very comfortable and even
With just going along with the ride.
yeah, exactly. They're very
And that's fun. I love having that happen.
yeah. It's great because then you can take you can either do your more approach where you're like, I can kind of take this and mold it in whatever direction I need. Whereas for me, it's like, oh, I can put you along whatever string I need.
Yes.
Like I
Whatever
already had
plot
this
line
whole
or quest
plot line.
line, yeah.
You said I can do whatever. I'm gonna do exactly that because it fits with my storytelling like the best way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it really comes down to, and again, we'll try and specify back down the world building, but in general, it's good to have that conversation with your players early on because the earlier you know
Like, what does the
that
player
they're gonna
want,
give up, they're either gonna give up more freedom or they're gonna be very very particular.
Yeah.
That's very helpful when you're trying to develop like the nuances of your plot.
I feel like you both discussed how much of a godsend it is sometimes to have an amnesiac player.
Yes. Oh my god.
It's such a fun mechanic and such a cool like thing to explore.
Yeah, because like it's that's literally the best. An amnesiac with a patron is like the most busted thing.
God, yeah,
it's
that's
actually,
like actually
so
cracked,
OP.
yeah.
Actually cracked.
Yeah, no. And I feel like that's fairly universal, honestly. Like also is like the whole like amnesiac like like player or like person who doesn't know their own backstory,
right? And
has like because there's two cases of that where the player has where they're doing a double blind, or sometimes where they've written out the backstory, but the them in character doesn't know about their own backstory.
Right.
That's one thing, and then having the completely like leap of faith type of thing.
Yeah.
Those ones, like sure, like obviously, like I enjoy writing like or helping players flesh out their backstories to the most degree, but having that amount of just freedom and like kind of improv, especially as an improv DM, having that ability to improvise at any point and drop in a lower part of this character.
Yeah.
Where where like initially it wasn't planned, but then I'm like you look at this person and you feel a weird like almost flashback to something that happens, and you feel your almost like chest pierce as you feel like 5 bullets go into you, and you then get an immediate sense of flight just seeing this guy, and like having those elements as an improv DM is very nice to make the world feel lived in, honestly.
Yeah, no, tying back to the previous one, I was gonna say the exact same. Like I was lucky enough to get like one player who wanted to be amnesiac.
I got
and
2
also
amnesiacs.
Was like, you can do whatever you want with my backstory. All I care about is that my whole shtick as a character is this, and also I have a patron named this. But they didn't give me more information on the patron. They just like gave me a name, and I was like,
no, exactly. Yeah.
Season 2 of this campaign is perfect because it was literally like not even like me having to mold something around the character or like me stringing it along. It was like when there's like a wooden puzzle. Like, and you have like the blank spaces, and you find the piece. They
just
give you
plug
a piece
exactly where the pieces
like right where it needs to go.
Yeah,
that was like the optimal scenario because I was like, I can use this for plot development. I can use this to develop other characters. I can develop NPCs, history. Like I can draw so much off of this open slate, and that was like the coolest thing when I was building up. The second part of the campaign, which unfortunately is unfinished and will likely remain so. Sorry to any of my players who are watching. But
shout out to the players.
Shout out to the players for sticking with it. But yeah, that was like the coolest part because I was like, you've given me like such a fantastic platform. I actually built an entire like small pantheon of gods off of like this one basically open style patron, while also letting me explore sort of like the Matt Mercer-esque like patron flashback or like patron realm.
Yes.
That was those were some of my favorite moments from that campaign in general. Was like me basically increasing the levels
Could
of
you elaborate on
attunement
the
that this.
patron flashback?
Yeah. So
I'm curious.
it was basically like a levels of attunement thing where they would
Okay.
slowly but surely, as this character found out the truth about their past, their patron was more visible to them in like a dream
Oh
realm.
yeah.
So like
I remember this.
when they
With the
slept,
eyes and the whole like great one. Yeah, I
So
remember
like
this. Yeah.
literally it started as like this
I
like
think that
first
was
of
in the
all it was
backstory
like
episode where we talked about
barely
this. Yeah.
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 Where like for the PC it started as barely like you as you sleep something's like telling you something. It's like whispers.
Yeah.
And then like as the character
Some Bloodborne type of
progressed,
beat on that.
yeah, literally. But as the character progressed, then they actually go from like you hear whispers and as you sleep to literally like you're
Audible,
standing
yeah.
in a pool of very very dark like water. And there seems to be like a reflection of it above you, and like you start to build out the realm, and then from that realm I started to build out the actual entity and make it as like over the top, but slowly and surely. And it was cool because like I could make it over the top just knowing that I had to add things.
Yes.
So like I made the eyes into a big like jaw grin that started talking. Like that was the most extra shit.
Yeah.
But I knew that like he's already seen a sky full of eyes. Like he knows that this is the seeing one. Like this is his thing. How do I like step this up and make it like more like visceral, more like real?
Intense.
So yeah, like it was just like that sort of allowed me to explore that style of storytelling, which was very very much like. And this is where after I put the characters on an island where they basically saw reflections of the past,
Oh. Yeah.
or
the flashback
reflections
episodes,
of the past or reflections of the future.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just like taunted them in their dreams. It was a great time.
Fun.
That was literally like lore dump the campaign.
Nice.
And it was also interesting because it wasn't all just returning players.
Yeah.
So like I get back to that thing. That's actually another thing that I did want to like mention now that I've kind of touched on it, but it's really interesting when you carry over campaigns.
Yes.
And introducing new PCs to the fold.
Yeah.
Is actually
Swapping
one of
in
the
and- yeah, no.
biggest like world building. It can be a
Opportunities.
struggle. It can be an opportunity.
It can also be a really big struggle. True.
Yeah, because sometimes you've kind of built this sort of
Dynamic and
like yeah, that's a great way to put it.
synergy,
A dynamic where like the characters have already kind of affected
Play off
your
of each
world in
other
a
and,
certain
yeah.
way. So like adding that extra element of a new PC
Yes.
can be like really jarring, and I think it's a. I think
a difficult task at
appreciate that
times,
you put it as an opportunity because that's how you should approach it.
Yeah.
It can be a struggle if you look at it as like, well, now I have to like fit this. And,
How like who's
it's
this
gonna be more
person
work.
and like how do I introduce them?
Yeah.
Is it this session? Is it next session? What's the good like momentum? Those are always really big things.
Yeah, but the alternative is like I have another piece of lore, another entire extension of lore that I can now start to work in.
Yeah.
So it's like a balance. But before we get like super deep, because we have talked about PCs, I did ask you this I think yesterday
Yes.
or the day before, and I wanted to like bring it up on the podcast. How do you world build around villains and specifically evil NPCs,
Yes.
big bads, things like
Yes.
that? Because that is
With my campaign rearing its end on the first first arc of the game I'm running. Yeah, no, that's a big question.
like I do that.
Yeah, I've struggled
like,
with it
even,
honestly.
like, for some reason, for me, like, well, not for some reason, it should be pretty clear. The people that doing the bad things usually, for me,
Have a
it's
good reasons.
most important that they have like motivation and also like a place, like a setting.
They're not
And
the
I don't mean
slapstick
just like
evil guy.
location, but like actual like, you
Origin
know,
story,
like
yeah.
political like situation, whether there's
Yeah.
war, their own origin story. So when you're world building, and again zoomed out,
Yes.
when you start zooming into characters, how much does your world building change, or how much do you adapt to your world once you start introducing, you know, the big enemies that your PCs are eventually going to run into?
I'll have to be very careful with how I phrase such things. 'Cause
Spoilers.
I feel like if Danny's in the chat or like any of my other players in the chat, no, no spoilers yet. We have a couple more weeks until we end this. But essentially, there's a big approach I did. Funny enough, I didn't. So I introduced a villain without knowing their backstory, me personally, until midway through the game, where I finally fleshed out the backstory from a new character introduction, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I feel like now I can't really get into too deep of it because it hasn't discussed in the game, but essentially, the sometimes you know, especially for how I built this villain, this faceless, you know, leader of this group.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the this kind of like organization is called the Black Mask, and there's this guy in the top who just his whole thing is he wears this black mask. No one knows his their identity, and his whole organization is dependent on that mechanic.
Right.
If everyone is like faceless and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, like I feel like this is a fairly understandable thing to discuss in terms of how, like, you know, this isn't really a spoiler. It's the whole concept of, you know, why are these people all hiding and obscuring their identities. It's mainly, there's a main mechanic of the fact that it's this whole, you know, like Legion, kind of like we are Legion kind of thing.
Right.
You know? It's very much ripped off of the Anonymous kind of like, you know,
Yeah, it's a
like
good
motif.
point. I have something, not to distract too much from what you're about to cover, but yeah, funny enough, I have. I
silver,
talked about the silver,
yeah. Oh my god,
which was kind of the same thing where like it wasn't.
It's more serious. I feel.
It wasn't that like the members don't know each other. It's like the top ranking people don't know who the other top ranking people are. It's like a very closed group, and even the people that work for them oftentimes won't know that they work for them.
Yeah.
There's like a certain layer where you have to cross before you're actually at like the silvered, and these are like they're almost like wives' tale level of like mythic. I want them to eventually be like
ghosts,
like the like very strong, like
they can be anywhere,
like drivers of the underground, but you don't actually hear about it, or they seem fake. Some people don't even believe they exist, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a cool tool.
And and I remember like honestly like I semi kind of ripped it off of the whole like mechanic that they had in, I think was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where they had the kind of cult of Cosmos. Where, you know, like you had these, you know, cultists who all had the same fairly similar mechanic of being, you know, like they meet and they don't know each other except by their code names, you know, and then, you know, like once you like as the player, you know, like explore and hunt these people down one by one, you get pieces of the puzzle piece on each branch of this cult and such. And, you know, like I really liked that mechanic and wanted to make a miniaturized and more compact version of it.
Right.
So, you know, I essentially, and the whole like faceless thing and all that stuff, you know, like the main question is, why are they doing this? You know, why is this group being evil?
Right.
And, you know, like, and sadly, it's fairly reasonable answer. They want power. And the thing, but the key mechanic is, you know, like thinking about why are they choosing this kind of like MO?
And what a visceral motivation. Well, I'll like grow. I like add on to that once you're kind of,
because it's a fairly universal thing, like, you know,
right.
like, you know, and the thing is, you know, like you can quote many people, you know, no man should have that power,
right?
You know, and like you know, there's a key thing
the
here.
Sadness in tech guys' eyes.
You know, the clock's ticking. I shouldn't got the power, you know. But like the thing is that that's the whole concept of, you know, essentially the average person wanting that power, you know, kind of exploring the key mechanic of, you know, how, you know, you're in this high magic world where there's these low magic average Joes. How can they band together and how can they provide a unified front that can destroy the strongest wizards and archmages?
Right.
How can they counteract what's, you know, people who are, you know, innately magical and have the power of, you know, demigods and gods on their side?
Right.
You do that with being completely unidentifiable, untraceable, and having guns.
Yeah.
That's that's the key thing, is like, you know, how I built it is, you know, it's this whole kind of, I guess, topic and kind of world. It really is a part of world building and informing the players in a way that, you know, like in my world in particular, guns are being fairly, like, I guess, modernized and being, you know, factory produced, and there are these major manufacturers and stuff. But the thing is, and, you know, like this may touch on, like, I guess, like kind of fairly like common modern day issues with, you know, you have all these accessible guns. What if a group wanted to use those guns not for good?
Right.
You know, and that thing is, you know, that whole thing of, you know, sure, the world is advancing and society is progressing, but does that mean that this progress good? Are these advancements actually useful to the world, or are they making it more dangerous for the average person?
Didn't think they thought about whether they could, but not
exactly.
whether they should.
Exactly. You know, like And that's the key thing that I wanted to approach. And how I see it, you can use your villains, and you can use like an organization as a whole, not just a single villain. It's useful to have a figurehead as an easy target. Because like for the players initially, they were like, okay, this is just the Black Mask. Who do we kill? How do we take them down? They're everywhere. Like that's the whole, and that's the biggest theme I wanted to do, is the power of having no real obvious hierarchy. Right. Everyone just has a Black Mask, and then like you introduce this like top figurehead. People then then the players, and especially in your world, you now have this person you can point to and be like, that guy is the bad guy. That guy is the guy that's controlling everything. Except what if it's not? What if there's a string attached to them? Like perhaps the Black Mask, or the party now knows him as being Deimos. What if he's not the biggest guy? Right. What if he's just puppets?
Right.
Which is spoilers technically. Who knows? Maybe
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I wanted to bring up. I guess I don't mind, because we're transitioning to like more
Freeform,
conversational
exactly.
episodes, anyway. I did want to talk about like something that you brought up, which is like, I think like so many people get caught up with giving their villains like deeper motivations, because again, this only applies to if you're like really worrying about that. If your big bad is just some big monster who's
it's like, a dragon who wants money, like, it's cool.
Naturally big and evil because it
if you
destroys
you got Xanathar as the bad guy, then you're set.
But yeah, I think I've heard a lot of times from like a couple of DMs that I've talked to, where they and I'm guilty of this as well. Is like sometimes like you get so caught up nailing down the details of like, oh, it's more complex. He doesn't hurt people because he's evil. He like has something going on, like something in his childhood, something happened to him. Yeah. Something about his hometown or his mom or whatever.
How I got these scars. Yeah, literally. That whole thing is he's a mechanic. Yeah.
And so it makes for an interesting villain. Yeah. But how much scarier is a villain that just exists for the sole purpose of being powerful? Like I was thinking about this.
Their presence is true, and
because like it's so you can't really like try and dig into the psyche of it. It's like so straightforward.
There's no analyzing.
Yeah, which I think makes for such a scary and in terms of like how it connects to world building, it really does like affect like how does this organization operate? Like why does this organization exist? Why does this organization surround this one character or group of characters that just want power? Like what do they think they're gonna achieve? So I think creating like more dumbed down villains that are not necessarily evil because like they have to be like, I like hurting people and whatever. It's more so like, this is my path to being more powerful than anyone. Like that to me is terrifying. I was coming up with a villain concept the other day. Like no one ever was, bro.
Exactly. Facts.
I was thinking about like just like how I wanted to build, because I had one like sort of villain / organization mind that was kind of like in that complexity. I built like a pocket about like if a character wanted to be like closely related to the organization or the character or whatever. Just because flashback sequences are like my favorite. Hashtag anime fan. But like
the average anime viewer flashbacks.
But I was thinking about like in one of the campaigns that I'm exploring, I'm like, what if this villain, like, what if it wasn't as like, what if it's not that deep, bro? What if literally like the thing that they're chasing is the same thing that this person is chasing?
Yeah.
One
or the party
for
is chasing
intrigue.
also.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like, what if the PCs are chasing this thing and someone else is chasing this thing and they're gonna clash because they're chasing the same thing, but the PCs might have a different motivator. Or at least that's how it's set it up. Right.
You have to set up some conflicting
PCs can
interests.
do whatever they want. If they decide they want power, that's on them. But to have like one villain whose sole purpose is just to become more powerful, that makes the dynamic so much. By making it less deep, I feel like it makes it more deep. If that makes any
having
sense.
Simple emotions and having simple desires isn't a bad thing lots of times, because it gives you a very strong base to build off of additional and secondary ideas and goals.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like it's a lot easier for you also as a both as a player and as a as the person writing this thing or like improvising this thing, when you have something so basic and so easily accessible. Everyone wants to be the best, there's seldom do you find a person who's like, oh yeah, I'm fine being third place. Like there's always that desire to better yourself, and tapping into that as a motive is a thing that even as players people do. Like half of my players I'm pretty sure just want to be better.
Yeah.
You know, like literally, like that's your motivation is, you know, you want to be the best bounty hunter, you want to be the best pirate, you want to be, you know, the best of what you can do.
Right.
And that's you know, it's nice to have a villain who the players can identify with and understand why they're doing in a way that doesn't require a psychoanalysis and a 3-page dissertation.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he's
And
hungry for power. You're too.
and
Yeah.
even stepping back further, while I agree that it can make it more relatable, it also almost for me the like power hunger that I'm thinking
Oh,
of
yeah.
almost dehumanizes.
Oh,
the
that is
villain.
true. Yeah, no.
To the point
It's a
where
reflection
it's
of
like,
evil. You
like
know?
why do you want this? And they're like, I literally want to be unkillable. I want to be superior than any other being. I want to be untouchable and
It's a
like,
power fantasy.
yeah, exactly. Like it I guess it's like getting slightly into the deeper psyche of it,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's simplifying enough that when it like a PC is trying to like unpack a character,
Yeah.
or unpack a villain, they don't find anything there, and that in and of itself, I think,
Yes, that is true.
dehumanizes the villain
There's
enough
no-
that they
yeah.
want to just like they want a reason to give this guy like a chance to be like a normal human. 'Cause,
Exactly.
sometimes like the complexities of villainous characters
that is
make
true,
them a
yeah.
little bit too relatable.
You get the Stockholm syndrome
Yeah.
thing also.
Yeah,
Like-
which you can use.
Yeah.
Not spoilers, but not spoilers.
Conflicts, you know? You can use that,
Yeah,
you know?
so, sometimes the villain isn't the actual villain, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like going way too complex with like what a villain wants to do and like all the deep reasons why they want to do this. If you just like strip that away, the villain to me becomes scarier because the PCs are like, why, like what the fuck is wrong with you, and there's no good answer other
You might
than
have
I
to do a
want
part
power.
3 on this episode. You were running pretty late on
Yeah.
time, I just realized.
Dude, villains.
Yeah.
We could do a whole thing on
Yeah.
villains.
But I fully agree, honestly. Yeah, and I feel like there's one thing I did want to mention also on that whole power thing, is the concept of, you know, yeah, because people always want to as you said, humanize the villain, and you know, like there is this frightening thing of a person having a perfectly normal life. You know, they were not orphaned. Their parents were nice people. You know, they were raised in a nice school. They ended up going to the best, you know, academy to get good and such. And they might have been a good person at a point because that's what served them best.
Right.
You know, they might have been the good guy who was, you know, on your team perhaps for a while. But then they realize, you know, that maybe being the good guy takes too long.
Right.
You know, maybe acquiring that, you know, power is through, you know, it's faster and easier to do it.
You just spoil the endings of like 7 animes at once.
Yeah, no, literally, because it's a fairly common trope that's accessible and useful and impactful, because it gives you that thing of, you know, like as quoting again, some people just want to see the world burn, you know. Also,
literally.
you know, you don't have to have any complex motives.
Yeah.
He's a monster and that's it, you know.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah, that's I guess a good note to wrap up on, is sometimes the villains are just monsters.
And that's the scary thing also, is like, you know, I guess tapping one, kind of looping back again, final lap, I swear.
Yeah.
But you know, you have that thing where the players also want power. It's just that they take it slower and don't kill children.
Right, like
they don't murder hobos.
They,
you know?
they care about like the means before getting to their ends.
Yeah, and it's frightening to see I guess it's also a reflection on these players can be the villains too if they go off the deep end.
Yeah,
you know, that whole warning of power. Like, great power comes great responsibility. This is a superhero episode, really, because like honestly, I highly recommend just reading into like, you know, superhero like origin stories and stuff, and trying to find something, because those are really like decent material to build off of, you know.
And going back to like the world building note, when you strip away what that I guess like there's two facets of it, but they both have like they
create more
their
space
own
for other stuff
effects.
also.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Is like, whether you give this villain tons of depth and give him like a big backstory, or whether you strip it away and dehumanize the character, both of those have big effects on how the world reacts to them. Because like if you have the former, where like it's a very complex person, there might actually be people who genuinely follow their cause and understand.
And they're good people,
this character.
Yeah, exactly.
And on the other hand, there's people who are just mortally like the two ways I would distinguish it is a complex character who is a villain because of their complexity and what they've like experienced. they usually have a tight circle of people that believe because they either
believe in
fall
their
under
cause,
the same
you know?
cause,
Yeah.
or they've experienced something similar,
Or loyalty
or
also.
they
You know?
understand that's a good one
Yeah.
too. Yeah, they're loyal to this person. They understand this person, and they see this person as not villainous, but like having an end
The ends
that
justify the
requires
means.
like
Yeah.
terrible means, and therefore
Yeah.
just ends justify the means. Whereas like when you strip it away and dehumanize and make it a monster, the people who generally follow that person, for me, when I'm
More
developing
unhinged.
my world, they're either equally crazy and they think they're gonna get to the same power level by following this person,
Yes.
or they do it out of fear, and
For
that's
the
the
Dark
one that
Lord,
I
you know, like,
usually
yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
And that's like, I guess, like more of like the, I
Being on
don't
the
know if
winning
that's the
side.
Harry Potter complex, but yeah,
Yeah.
like being on the winning side, like the Peter Pettigrew
Yeah.
like idea where like it's purely out of fear. They're afraid that, no, this is like the basilisk thing where like you're outright fear.
That's too much of a
that
kind of. That's the kind of form I don't
you're-
know open with.
no, but it really
Yeah.
is like
It is
people
true.
will follow this unhinged villain because of the fear that if that person wins, they will not be on the winning side.
Yes.
And will
It is a very
therefore
true,
be
like,
destroyed
yeah, no.
because they didn't follow him.
It's
So
a
like if you
compelling
follow him in the
reason.
first place, they might not kill you. They might
Yeah.
have mercy.
And it also creates very good opportunities for, you know, turncoat villains and turncoat, you know, like commanders and stuff. Is you have that whole thing where they are literally there to survive. Once they see a better option of surviving, they'll switch sides at a flip of a coin, and they'll do the double agent thing also.
Right.
And you can just do the even meaner thing of, oh yeah, you know, like, oh
It just
guys, I'm
goes-
switching sides because, you know, y'all are good guys, and I want to be a good guy, and you're like, I was forced to do this, guys. And then as soon as you see any point of failure or weakness,
They're
okay,
gone.
guys, see y'all, kill a
God.
character.
Having the
Killer
having
PC,
the
yeah.
weak loyalty
Yeah.
or like the low loyalty like PC
Literally
NPCs is so
loyalty
funny.
modifier, you know,
Yeah.
like it's they do that in games a bunch now,
Yeah.
where like you have those generals who can turncoat any moment and you can
Right.
lose them very fast.
God, I don't know if I haven't like fully attempted it, but I'd be curious to see how many times I can get them to like infiltrate the
person?
party.
Oh my
Like
god,
see
that'd
how
be
many times I
mean.
can get the
That'd
party
just be
to trust
dirty,
this
not
idiot.
gonna lie.
I remember
Yeah.
I feel like the most frustrating. There was this movie. I think I've brought it up a couple of times to you because I think it's a fantastic film. But
Yes.
the film Silence about
Oh,
like
yeah.
the priests who go to
We should probably
Japan.
wrap it up.
Yeah, I know. But there's this character there that just continue like these poor priests just keep trusting him, and just over and over again he just comes short.
Yeah.
I wonder how many times I could put a character like that into a campaign, and
It's mean. I'm tempted to. I'm probably gonna do that next game.
it's just like I don't know. There's
yeah.
so much good content.
Yeah.
But in any case, yeah, we should wrap it up. We have just rolled over the hour. So
Probably continuing Worldbuilding for part 3.
yeah,
You know, shout out to everyone who's watching. You know, either currently or in the future. You know, if any of y'all have any questions or such, you know, there's the Google Forms on on our bio, as well as if you're in the Discord server, there should be the forms that we post out almost every week, and also our YouTube account that I'm uploading VODs to. You know, it's a very fun experience. We got copy striked.
yeah, let's go.
You know, shout out to YouTube copy striking. But hey, you know, like, luckily we fixed that pretty fast. But yeah, feel free to watch our VODs, and you know, if you have any questions or such, you know, even if you can also just message me on Discord if you know, if you're in the server and you would rather just message me, always feel free to do so. You know, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us, and yeah, as Solomon mentioned, things will be a little bit more freeform. So don't worry about like a specific topic. Just ask questions, ask points that you want us talked
Yeah.
about, because basically what we'll do from now on is probably just like pick a couple of like umbrella topics and then just like talk until the hour.
Go
up.
sicko mode.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, thank you all for joining us, and we will catch you next week.
See y'all, yeah.